You promised yourself you would change. You would wake up earlier. Stop procrastinating. Save money. Study harder. Exercise. Stop checking their profile. Finally become the person you keep imagining. And then, you broke the promise. Again. But what if the problem isn't that you lack discipline? What if, every time you make a promise to yourself, your brain quietly decides that keeping it isn't worth the immediate discomfort? And once you understand why, your repeated failures start to make a disturbing amount of sense. Think about the last promise you made to yourself. Maybe it was something small. Tomorrow, I'll wake up at 6. Then morning comes. Your alarm rings. You're tired. Your bed is warm. And suddenly, 6 a.m. doesn't feel like an opportunity anymore. It feels like punishment. So you tell yourself, just 5 more minutes. 5 minutes becomes 30. And now the promise is broken. But here's what's interesting. At the moment you made the promise, you weren't lying. You genuinely intended to keep it. That's what makes this cycle so frustrating. The version of you who makes the promise and the version of you who has to keep it are experiencing completely different psychological realities. At night, you're imagining the future. You're thinking about the benefits. Better grades. More money. A healthier body. More confidence. A more organized life. The future version of you looks incredible. But when tomorrow arrives, your brain isn't looking at the future. It's looking at what feels good, or painful, right now. And that difference is where many broken promises begin. One of the biggest reasons you break promises to yourself is surprisingly simple. You treat your future self like a completely different person. Imagine saying, "I'll study for 3 hours tomorrow." At that moment, you're essentially making a deal with someone who doesn't exist yet. Future you will deal with the tiredness. Future you will deal with the boredom. Future you will deal with the temptation to scroll. And because the discomfort belongs to future you, the decision feels cheap today. Psychologists often discuss this through the idea of temporal discounting, our tendency to value immediate rewards more heavily than rewards that arrive later. That is why watching a video for 10 minutes can feel more attractive than studying for an exam that is weeks away. The exam is important. But the video is immediate. Your brain is not necessarily choosing what matters most. It's often choosing what feels most rewarding now. And this creates a strange pattern. You keep making promises based on the person you want to be, while making decisions based on how you currently feel. But sometimes, you don't just break the promise. You make the promise knowing, somewhere inside, that you probably won't keep it. And that's where things get darker. Sometimes, making a plan gives you a tiny emotional reward before you've done any work. You decide, "Tomorrow I'm going to completely change my life." For a moment, you feel different. Motivated. Hopeful. In control. You haven't actually changed anything yet. But psychologically, you can experience some of the emotional satisfaction associated with becoming the person you want to become. This is one reason people can spend hours planning a new routine without actually following it. The plan creates certainty. The plan creates hope. And hope feels much better than confronting the uncomfortable reality of starting. This is also why dramatic promises can become addictive. From tomorrow, no more procrastination. From Monday, I'll exercise every day. This is the last time I'll waste my time. The bigger the promise, the more powerful the emotional reset can feel. But when the excitement disappears, the actual work remains. And suddenly, you're back where you started. Except now there's something else. Guilt. And guilt creates the next psychological trap. After breaking a promise, you might tell yourself, "I'm so lazy. I have no discipline. What's wrong with me?" So you make an even stronger promise. "Tomorrow, I have to do it." For a short time, guilt can create urgency. But guilt is a terrible long-term foundation for behavior change. Because when every failed attempt becomes evidence that you're lazy, your goal stops being simply doing the task. Now you're trying to prove something about yourself. And that creates emotional pressure. Imagine someone who has repeatedly promised themselves they would study. Every time they fail, they think, "I'm just not disciplined." Eventually, opening the textbook doesn't simply mean studying. It reminds them of every previous failure. So they avoid the textbook. Then they feel guilty. Then they avoid it even more. The behavior becomes emotionally loaded. This is why self-criticism can sometimes produce the exact behavior you're trying to eliminate. You don't escape procrastination by turning yourself into an enemy. But there's an even more surprising reason your promises fail. Sometimes the promise is simply too big. "I'll exercise for 1 hour every day. I'll study 5 hours every evening. I'll never use social media unnecessarily again." These promises sound impressive. But psychologically, they can be fragile. Because if the behavior is dramatically different from your current routine, your brain has very little evidence that you're actually going to maintain it. You are trying to jump from one identity to another overnight. And when the first difficult day arrives, the entire plan can collapse. This is where self-efficacy matters. Self-efficacy is essentially your belief that you can successfully perform a behavior and handle the challenges involved. And one of the best ways to strengthen that belief isn't through giant declarations. It's through evidence. Small victories create evidence. If you tell yourself you'll read for 10 minutes, and you actually do it, you've just given your brain proof. When I say I'll do something, I sometimes actually do it. Do that repeatedly, and something changes. You're no longer trying to convince yourself through words. You're building trust through experience. And this leads to perhaps the most important revelation of all. When you repeatedly break promises to yourself, something more subtle can happen. You begin to trust yourself less. You say you'll wake up early. You don't. You say you'll stop procrastinating. You don't. You say you'll save money. You don't. Eventually, your own words start losing authority. You can make another promise. But somewhere inside, there's a quiet voice saying, "We've heard this before." That is the real psychological cost. It's not simply the missed workout, the unfinished book, the study session you skipped, the hour you wasted. It's the gradual erosion of self-trust. And self-trust matters because behavior is easier when you believe your own decisions. Think about someone you don't trust. If they promise they'll show up at 8 a.m., you probably won't organize your entire day around that promise. But if someone has consistently kept their word, you don't need to question them. The same principle can apply internally. Your goal isn't to become someone who makes perfect promises. It's to become someone whose actions gradually make their promises believable. So how do you rebuild that trust? Not by making a bigger promise. By making a smaller one. Instead of saying, "I'm going to become disciplined," Choose something your brain can actually execute. At 7 p.m., I'll study for 10 minutes. Instead of, I'm going to stop wasting time on my phone. Try. When I sit down to study, my phone stays across the room for 20 minutes. Notice the difference. One is an identity statement. The other is a specific behavior. And specific behaviors are easier for the brain to act on. You can also make the desired action easier and the unwanted action harder. Put the book on your desk before you sleep. Keep your workout clothes visible. Move distracting apps away from your home screen. Put your phone somewhere inconvenient when you're working. This isn't about having superhuman discipline. It's about changing the environment in which your decisions happen. Because your environment is constantly negotiating with your behavior. And sometimes, the smartest thing you can do isn't become stronger. It's make the wrong choice harder. So if you keep breaking promises to yourself, try this. First, make promises embarrassingly small. Don't promise yourself 2 hours of studying. Promise 10 minutes. Don't promise yourself a perfect morning routine. Promise one action. The goal isn't to impress yourself. It's to create consistency. Second, attach the action to a specific cue. Don't say, I'll exercise sometime tomorrow. Say, after I brush my teeth in the evening, I'll exercise for 10 minutes. A clear cue removes some of the decision-making involved. Third, track promises kept, not just goals achieved. Put a small mark on a calendar every time you keep a commitment. You're collecting evidence. Evidence that you can trust yourself. Fourth, stop using failure as a reason to abandon the entire plan. If you miss Monday, don't wait for next Monday. Restart Tuesday. One broken promise doesn't have to become a broken week. And finally, never make a promise when you're highly emotional that your future self will have to survive through discomfort. Before committing to something, ask, would I still agree to this when I'm tired, bored, stressed, or unmotivated? Because that is the person who will actually have to keep it. Maybe you've spent years thinking your biggest problem was laziness. Maybe you thought you needed more motivation, more discipline, more willpower. But perhaps the deeper problem was that you kept asking yourself to believe promises that your actions hadn't yet earned. You don't rebuild self-trust through one massive transformation. You rebuild it quietly. One small promise. One kept commitment. One ordinary day at a time. And eventually, something changes. You stop saying, this time I'll really do it. Because you no longer need to convince yourself. You have evidence. Your brain has seen you keep your word. And perhaps that's what real discipline actually is. Not forcing yourself to become someone else. But teaching yourself, through repeated action, that when you say you'll do something, you mean it. If this made you see your own habits differently, subscribe to Hidden Minds for more explorations into the psychology behind the things we do without realizing why. And tell me in the comments, what's one promise you've been making to yourself that you keep breaking? Sometimes, recognizing the pattern is the first step toward changing it. Thank you for watching. Until next time, keep exploring your hidden mind.